Hello again, Dylan here from All You Can Board, and I am back with another how to play video, this time for Sumatra, which is a brand new game from Ludonova and designed by who else? Dr. Reiner Knizia, one of our favorite designers, and we can never play enough Reiner Knizia games because, you know, as they say, a doctor a day keeps the apple away. So in Sumatra, you're going to be exploring the largest island in Indonesia, which is of course Sumatra, and you're going to be part of an expedition, filling in your notebook as best you can, trying to become the expedition leader. And to do that, you're going to need to discover different flowers and exotic animals and all the different varieties of cultures by talking to the inhabitants of the island. And as you do that, you'll fill in your notebook and score points for each category in different ways. This is a very, very cool game, and it's very simple to learn, but there's a lot of complexities in the strategy and how you carry out the different actions. So let's jump right into Dr. Reiner Knizia's newest game, Sumatra. To set up Sumatra, place the map board in the center of the table on the side corresponding to your player count. Give each player a travel notebook and everyone chooses a color of player pawn. Place all player pawns at the base camp area of the map. Shuffle the circular round information tiles face down, and then for 2 or 3 players, turn over 5 of them, or for 4 or 5 players, turn over 18 of them. Place all of these face-up tiles at the bottom of the map in what is called the available information area. Now turn all the remaining round information tiles face up and place them at the top of the map. This is the known information area. Put all the square information tiles into the cloth bag and put it near the map board. There are 2 types of badge tiles, these brown ones as well as these longer green ones. Place all of them face up next to the map board. And finally, take the travel notebook token and place it with the player pawns in the base camp space. Now you're ready to play Sumatra. Okay, so in Sumatra, you're going to be moving around the island on all the designated spots in a specific order, and you're going to be collecting information in the form of tiles. And these tiles have different categories, and you're going to be placing them in your notebook on the specific rows that apply to those categories and scoring them in different ways depending on what the category is. Every action you take is associated to where the travel notebook is in relation to your player pawn. So you're gonna have a different set of actions available to you if you're on the same space as the notebook token or if you're ahead of it or behind it. So I'm gonna go through all those in order, but don't worry, all things considered, it's pretty simple and there's not that many actions to wrap your head around. Most of the strategy and most of the depth of this game is gonna be coming from how you choose to take, which tiles you choose to take and in what order and how you're choosing to score and what you're prioritizing. So let's jump right into the actions. Let's start with if your pawn is in the same location as the travel notebook. If this is the case, you have 2 actions to choose from. Either take 1 tile from the available information area, or move your pawn instead of taking a tile. If you choose to take a tile, remember you're only taking it from the available information area, which is the section at the bottom of the map, not the top of the map. Simply take a tile of your choice and put it into your travel notebook on the appropriate row that matches the category of the tile. Alternatively, if you do not want to take any of the tiles, you can choose one to move to the known information area. This can be used to block a tile from any of your opponents. If instead you choose to move your pawn instead of taking a tile, you simply move your pawn to whatever the next space on the map is. You will never move more than 1 space at a time in Sumatra. If there are no tiles left to choose in the available information area, you have no choice, you must choose the move your pawn action. Lastly, there are 2 special rules that come into play with movement. The first one only applies to the start of the game. No pawn can move away from the base camp until all round tiles in the available information area have been taken. So think of the first few rounds of the game as just choosing tiles and establishing what your strategy is going to be at the start of the game. The second special rule is that no pawn can leave a location if there are inhabitant tiles in the available information area. Inhabitant tiles are labeled by this icon here. You can choose to move your pawn at any point, even if there are several tiles still available in the available information area. Okay, so those are the 2 actions you'll decide between if you're in the same location as the notebook token. Now let's jump into if you are 1 ahead of the notebook token. If your pawn is 1 step ahead of the travel notebook token on your turn, there is a set of actions you must go through. You do not have a choice. First, move the notebook token to the same spot as your player token. Then, take all tiles that are in the available information area and move them all to the known information area at the top of the map. Next, take a look at the number on the space that your player token is on. Randomly take as many square tokens from the cloth bag as that number and place them face up in the available information area. And finally, take one of these new tiles and add it to your notebook. And finally, if your pawn is one step behind the travel notebook token, your entire turn is spent moving your token to the same spot as the travel notebook, and then your turn ends. And believe it or not, that is the entire game. You're just following these actions, moving around the board until you all end up at the pier. Once you're at the pier, which is the last spot on the map, you have to get rid of every single token that's in the available information area, and then the game ends and you're just scoring things up. So you're probably wondering, Dylan, you've barely explained anything. Where's the points? How are we actually winning this game? Even though this is the entire course of the game, everything you're doing and much of what you need to learn about this game is just how you're collecting different categories of tokens, adding them to your notebook, and trying to score for these different categories. So I'm now going to go over the notebook in general, as well as every single category one by one and how they score. And once you have all that information, you'll be ready to play Sumatra. Your travel notebook is divided into 9 rows, and each row is associated to one category of information tile. As a general rule, you'll only want to place these from left to right in a row, and also every single spot can only hold 1 tile, except for the spots that have a number 3 on them. Those can hold 3 tiles in the same spot. Once you place a tile, you cannot move them. Okay, let's start with the top row, inhabitants. At the end of the game, the player or players with the most inhabitant tiles will get 5 points, and the player or players with the least will lose 5 points. If all players have the same amount, nobody gets any points. Additionally, the final spot that has the number 3 on it, you will earn an extra 5 points for every inhabitant tile that is on this spot, regardless of whether you have the most or least inhabitant tiles. Next up, we have the craft row, which holds all the different craft tiles in the game. At the end of the game, you'll simply get 0, 2, 5, 10, or 20 points, depending on whether you have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 craft tiles. Very simple. Okay, next up we have the flora and fauna rows. Now this is being done together because these are actually linked, and you'll notice that some rows in your notebook are linked, and you can tell that by the fact that there are no gaps between them. They actually just directly touch. This means that for flora and fauna, the points are connected to one another. As soon as one of the 2 boxes in a column is occupied by a plant or an animal, you can now place a plant or an animal in the next row beside it. It doesn't even have to be the same type. So for instance, if I placed a flora in this first row, I would now be able to place an animal in this second row or a flora in this second row. Likewise, I would also be able to place an animal in this first row to complete the column. The way that this double row scores is that for every single column, you will look at the value on the bottom right-hand corner of both tiles, and you will score for the higher one. So for instance, if in this first row, I had a 4 value flora and a 2 value fauna, I would score 4 points. You don't calculate the difference between the value. It's not 4 minus 2. You just score the higher value. If both tiles have the same value, you only score for one of them. Next up is another double row. This is reception and GPS. Now in terms of tile placement, these function the exact same way as flora and fauna. As soon as you place a tile in the first column, you can place a tile into the second column in either spot of the double row. However, the difference here is that reception and GPS do not score you any points whatsoever. This is not a point row. Rather, as soon as you complete a column, that is, get a reception and a GPS in the same column, you are allowed to take a free tile from the known information area at the top of the map. Now note, this is the only time in the entire game of Sumatra that you can ever take a tile from the top known information area of the board. So there are tiles that will be placed there as we push tiles from the available information area to the top. There's also tiles that start there at the top of the game. You can keep your eye on some of those, and you know that if you get a pair of reception and GPS, you can start grabbing from that top section, perhaps before your opponents do, or to fill in gaps you have on your notebook. Next up, we have villages, and villages are unique in that they are tied to reception and GPS, but are not part of a double row or triple row with them. At the end of the game, you will get 5 points for every single village tile, but only if you have more completed reception and GPS pairs than village tiles. Now this is an all or nothing condition. So for instance, if you had 4 pairs of reception and GPS tiles and 4 villages, you do not have more reception and GPS pairs than villages, so you actually score for none of the villages. You would get 0 village points. However, if you had 4 pairs of reception and GPS tiles and 3 villages, you would score for all 3 villages and get 15 points. And finally, we end with a double row again, which is the volcano row and the equipment row, which again are tied together. The placement rules of the previous double rows still applies here. As soon as you place a volcano or an equipment tile in a column, you can now place a volcano or equipment tile in the next column over as well. The difference here is that the volcano and equipment tiles are related by color. That is that there are 5 colors of volcano and there are 5 colors of equipment tiles, and each column can only apply to a single color. So for instance, if I placed a red volcano on this first column, I can only place red equipment tiles underneath of it. Likewise, you can only represent each color once on your notebook, so you can't have 2 columns that have the same color. But again, keep in mind that for every single equipment tile spot, you can hold up to 3 of the same color of equipment. Now, even though the volcano and equipment rows are connected as a double row, each one scores separately. That's very important, keep that in mind. So for the volcano row, you will score 5 points for each volcano only if you have 3 equipment tiles of that corresponding color underneath of it. If you have less than 3 equipment tiles underneath that volcano, you score -5 points. So committing to a volcano is a risk, and you are saying, I will get 3 of this equipment tile that I need, and if you don't, you will lose 5 points. For the equipment row, you will score 5 points for every 3 equipment tiles you have on a single spot, regardless of whether you have the corresponding volcano. Now there is one final special rule that comes in with the equipment row, and it is super important, and it really will start to dictate a lot of what you do on your entire notebook. It's called lack of equipment. Let me explain what it means. So equipment isn't only tied to the volcano row, it's also essential for the entire expedition. What this means is that at the end of the game, for every column on your notebook that you don't have at least 1 equipment tile in, you have to remove every single tile from that column across every single row before you score. Therefore, your goal is to get at least 1 equipment tile of every color, otherwise you're going to lose an entire column of scoring at the end of the game. This is very important. And the very last thing you need to know about Sumatra are the badges. So the badges are additional bonus ways of scoring, and they come in 2 forms. There are the brown badges and the green badges. Let me show you a little bit about them. For brown badges, you can claim 1 or more on your turn as soon as you meet the requirement listed on them. The requirements vary, but always have to do with having a certain amount of specific tiles. For instance, this one requires you to own 3 inhabitant tiles. And this one requires you to own 2 craft tiles and 2 fauna tiles. This one specifically says you need to be the first person to collect 1 of every color of equipment tile. As soon as you meet this requirement, you can claim the tile, and that tile is now taken away from the game and no other player can claim it. The second type of badges are the green badges, and you can only ever claim 1 of these during a game. This is kind of like a push your luck mechanic. You have to decide how far you want to go to try to claim the most valuable of these tiles and when to just take the one that you've already accomplished. So for this tile, you get 3 points if you have at least 1 tile in 6 different rows. This is 5 points if you have 1 tile in 7 rows. This is 7 points if you have at least 1 tile in 8 rows. And finally, you get 9 points if you have at least 1 tile in 9 rows. So again, the way these work is that you're essentially deciding, are you going to go for the most valuable of these tiles, or is someone else pushing ahead of you and you think they're going to get the one worth 9 points? Then you might snatch the one that only gives you 7 points, because if you're playing with 3 or 4 or 5 players, it's going to be a competition to see who can get the first ones. If the one you want to get is already gone, say you have all 9 rows, but you were late to the party and someone else already grabbed that one, you can take one of the previous ones down. But again, those are going to be going as players reach those requirements. Overall, that's pretty much all you need to know. Again, a lot of this is going to be just you learning the game as you learning the strategies as you go, but I hope these rules help you get this to the table just a little bit quicker. If you have any questions whatsoever, obviously leave us a comment and I will be happy to answer anything I can. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment. We appreciate all of it, and I'll see you in the next one.